What do you call someone who can speak two languages? Do you know? We have a word for that in English. Bilingual, exactly. And if someone can speak three languages, polylota. Okay. Or in English we would say trilingual. And
English, Arabic, and little French.
yeah. What do you call someone who can only speak one language? An American. So, alas, I can greet you in many languages, but the only language I really speak well is English, American. I can fake my way through a Spanish conversation. That's about it. So, I heard a story about two sisters. And these sisters had a fight. They had an argument about some trivial thing that happened in their lives. So really, this was a minor disagreement. And what ended up happening was they actually drew a line right through the middle of their house, right through the doorway. And they, even though they lived together, they divided their house into two halves. And they never spoke to each other. And at night, in the darkness, they could hear one another breathing. And they just lived along together in this grinding silence for the rest of their lives. That is very sad. And I hear that story. I think grinding silence, that is such a powerful phrase for what conflict can do between two people. So this morning, we want to talk about conflict, how we can really not just address it, but how we can embrace it. When you hear the word conflict, what comes to mind? What does that make you feel in your heart? Uncomfortable. Okay. Why does that make you feel uncomfortable?
Because I don't like conflict.
You don't like conflict. Does anyone in the room like conflict? Okay, good. We'll come back to you in a minute. Lena is up for a fight anytime. So why don't you like conflict?
I mean, I'm sure it has to go back to something where I want to please people. So I don't like it when someone's upset with me.
Okay, you don't want someone to be upset with you. So what happens then if somebody's upset with us? So what? Why do we not want people to be upset with us? Yeah, Sammy.
Very sad, too much sad and not happy.
Okay.
Too much complicated, not thinking well, maybe looking to the future with black black way or something like that.
Yeah, okay. So it hurts when people are upset with us. It's uncomfortable.
Bad impression.
They have a bad impression of us. And again, I would ask the question, so what? But it matters, doesn't it? Because I think in us, we want to know that we are safe. We want to know that we are respected. If someone is upset with us, we're afraid they will attack us, either physically or emotionally. Lena, why do you like conflict?
Because I think that conflict shows the reality of the relationship, and after the conflict,
You're a lucky man. No, I'm sure you do, although I'll bet there's sometimes you don't feel like a lucky man. So I think Lena has said something that's very true. In fact, I just heard the other day that married couples who do this one thing with each other a lot have very healthy relationships. And this one thing is tease. Make fun of. If a couple is able to laugh at each other and make fun of one another, it shows that there is safety in their relationship. And they trust each other. In a very similar way that Lena mentioned, when a couple or when people are able to engage in conflict, it actually shows that there's a level of trust there and safety that reflects the relationship and the team. So we're going to talk today about how we can change our perspective on conflict and learn to embrace it, and give you some tools to help you work through conflict. Notice this. Healthy conflict is centered on ideas. It's centered on ideas. It's not about people or personalities. I don't know if you've noticed that we just had an election here in the United States. And if you were unfortunate enough to hear any of the commercials and ads from the different campaigners, what you probably noticed is that they spent most of their time attacking each other and not talking about ideas. So there's a lot of very unhealthy conflict around us in the world, and there's not a lot of healthy dialogue and discourse about ideas and concepts. And hopefully, at the end of this hour, we will all agree with Lena that great relationships require healthy conflict in order to grow. You can teach this next time, Lena. Okay. St. Paul said, so far as it depends on you, be at peace with all men. So that's the mindset that I want you all to embrace. Be at peace with all men. Yet, in order to achieve that peace, we're going to have some conflict. So, what are some characteristics of a team that fears conflict? Think of a team you've been on when that was typified by conflict. What was that like? Difficult. Okay. How well did that team perform?
Not well.
Not well. Why do you think that was?
We needed certain people, leaders, or to hold other people accountable, but they wouldn't because they were afraid of hurting the other person's feelings.
So your team had conflict that wasn't being addressed.
Yes.
Okay. So the team doesn't perform as well if the conflict is ignored. if it's not being addressed. What are some other characteristics of teams with conflict? Yeah.
Resentment and anger towards each other because they won't talk.
Okay. So maybe people start ignoring each other and they hold resentment towards one another. So again, we're talking about unresolved conflict. And what's the result of that? How well does the team perform? It gets in the way. Right, right. And you'll hear a lot more about this on Saturday. But when people fear conflict, when people are in a fearful state, their brain gets flooded with cortisol. They start locking up. And they're not performing at their best. And as a team, you want yourself and your teammates to perform at your best. And that's going to happen in a safe environment where people aren't afraid. Now, here in the United States, we just had the World Series. Praise the Lord, the Boston Red Sox won. Yes, I am a lifelong Red Sox fan. In Game 3, they went into extra innings. 18 innings, longest game in history. They brought in, as a relief pitcher, a starter named Eovaldi. And he was supposed to pitch maybe 2 innings because he had pitched the 2 previous games in relief. So he comes in exhausted, and this game just grinds on. In the bottom of the 18th inning, he gave up a home run, and they lost the game. He was dejected. He was not happy. But when he walked off the field, another pitcher came out of the dugout, pounded him in the chest, and gave him a big old hug, and just grabbed him and loved him. And that typified the Red Sox dugout. In fact, later that night, every team member in the locker room, every team member gave him a hug and loved him because of what he did and the sacrifice he made for the team.
So this team is lost after that?
Yeah, they just lost. They just lost that game. And when you're in that type of environment, you're freed up to be your best because you know your teammates aren't going to turn on you. So, characteristics then of a team that actually engages in conflict, I want you to look at this. This is from a book called The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. You'll notice that the first dysfunction is that there's an absence of trust. Teammates don't trust one another. And we already said that when teammates don't trust one another, there's a state of fear on the team. Some of that fear revolves around conflict. They are afraid, like Ruth was saying, they are afraid to talk through ideas, talk through performance that is not up to par. Because there's a lack of conflict, then there's a lack of commitment. This allows people to make excuses. Well, they may say, I didn't have an opportunity to give my input into that decision. Or I never agreed with that. But because they didn't talk about these ideas, people are not committed to the path forward. It gives them an excuse. As Ruth stated, there's a lack of accountability. A lack of accountability because of that lack of commitment. And as a result, There's inattention to results. Now, what does every team want? We all want this right here. We all want results. But notice, this is the foundation of every great team. Trust. So, if we turn this upside down, or look at it the other way, these are the 5 functions of a team. The first function of a team is to build trust. Trust equals safety. Right here. That's the foundation. The most important thing you can do with your team. Secondly, that trust, that safety, allows people to engage in healthy conflict. Conflict about ideas, not conflict about personalities. Because we're able to engage in healthy conflict, that results in commitment. This is the path forward. I just told you that story about the Boston Red Sox. Something else you need to know about that team is that the coach invested so much time building relationships with his team members that they trusted him implicitly. When, in that game that went 18 innings, he burned through, I think, 44 players and used up all but 2 of his pitchers. It was a huge risk. But his players trusted him. Is there a question? Okay. Okay. After the game, the coach called a team meeting, which is something he never does because he hates team meetings. And they all know that he hates team meetings. But because they trusted him, even though the game ended at, 3 o'clock in the morning, they gathered in the locker room to listen to the coach. And they were willing to continue to follow him because of the commitment they had as a team as they worked on building trust and working through their conflict. Because then there's commitment, you have accountability. You can now say to your players, to your teammates, to your spouse, we agreed that this is the way we were going to behave. This was the path we were going to take. Why is your behavior not according to our agreement? See, now we're not talking about personalities. We're talking about ideas. We're talking about execution. We're not blaming and attacking one another. When we have accountability, we have results. Back to what Ruth was talking about and the team that she was on that was afraid of embracing conflict. And because of that lack of conflict, there was lack of commitment, lack of accountability, and lack of results. Now, we're all athletes here, I believe. And what do we like to do? What? We like to improve ourselves? Sure. We like to compete, but what do we like more? We like to win. Give me the W. Look, let's be honest. Who likes to go out there and lose? You want the best chance of winning. And I'm telling you right now, this is how you get it. You build a team that trusts one another, that can engage in conflict, that resolves a commitment, which allows accountability, and that's going to get you your results. Now, I don't have time to get into how we build trust, but that is where you want to, and different types of trust, but that is where you want to spend a lot of your time. When you run plays, when you run drills, really what you're doing is you're building trust. Your athletes learn to trust themselves with their own skills. They also learn to trust one another. So there's a certain amount of trust that's built on competency. So how did your family deal with conflict or disagreements when you were growing up? Not well? What does that mean? What does that look like?
Avoid it.
Avoid it.
Hide it. It's okay, or it's not there.
Okay.
Don't address it.
All right. All right. So we have an avoider here. Lena, did your family engage in conflict? What was that like?
I think that in my case, my family is not very affect to me because I lost my mom when I was 14 years old. So what I learned about conflict and about disagreements, I think that was like from the Bible.
Oh, okay.
Yes. So in my family, until my 14 years old, it was many times avoid the conflict.
Avoid it. Okay.
Yes. Or very angry conflict.
Okay. All right. So it's hot or cold? Okay. Caliente o frío?
No, we don't do that.
No.
As Latin Americans, we try to do more.
Well, no, yeah.
Keep away from problems.
Yeah.
Discussions and disagreements.
All right. Very good. Very good. So, as you think about your family growing up and think about your current behavior, do you see a connection there? You now engage in conflict. Are you avoidant? Or
I've learned to kind of work on that.
you've learned to work on it. Great.
That doesn't help anything.
Right.
I had to learn that the hard way.
Yeah, it doesn't help when we avoid it. Good. So conflict is not, I want you to think of conflict not as an accident, but as an assignment. It's from an American pastor and author, Ken Sande, who came up with a book called Peacekeepers, Peacemakers, right? So, very good book. So it's an assignment because it's an opportunity to grow. We see conflict as a threat, something to avoid, something to run away from, rather than an opportunity. It's an opportunity for us and others to grow as we recognize that we need other people. It helps us to uncover our unproductive attitudes and habits. It's not necessarily fun, but we do grow. It reminds us that we're human after all, which promotes then humility. And I think humility is a very attractive character quality. But it's also an opportunity to serve others, to help them grow. teach and encourage them, to help carry their burdens. Well, this is a very different perspective, isn't it? We tend to think of conflict as something to run away from or an accident. Oh, it's because of communication breakdown. Well, maybe it is, but it's no accident. It's an opportunity. So whose opportunity is it? It was said, yeah, exactly. It was said a couple thousand years ago that if your brother sins against you, if somebody offends you, go and tell him, hey, when you did that, that hurt. Just you and he or you and she alone. And if he listens, you've gained your brother. So whose opportunity is this? The person who was hurt or offended, or the offender, the one who did the offending?
Technically both, but I can only control my
Okay, but in this one here, it's if your brother sins against you. So the offended person, in this case,
Oh, I got what
yeah, see where I'm going? So in this case, if you were offended, go to the person who offended you. Now let's look at another example. About the same time, therefore, if you remember that someone has something against you, go and be reconciled to that person. So whose opportunity is it? The offender or the offended? The offender. Right. So in the first example, it's the one who was offended. In the second example, it was the one who did the offending, the offender. Back to your answer, Ruth. It's our responsibility. Whether we were offended or whether we were the offender, it's our responsibility to go. Back to what St. Paul said. If it's possible, be at peace with all men. Okay, so here's some steps that you can use to effectively resolve conflict. First, you want to establish the setting. And what I mean by that is just let someone know you want to talk with them in a certain place at a certain time. Do this by taking what I call a for stance. F-O-R. I am for you stance. So if you need to talk, let's say, to your assistant coach, say, hey, coach, you're making a great contribution on this team. I'm really glad you're here. It'd be good for us to touch base later today in my office to talk about how things are going. So now, you are approaching this person from the perspective of, I want to help you. I want to help us. I am for you. Because remember, when people are afraid, they get locked up. So, how many of you, when you got called into the boss's office, thought, yeah, he's going to give me a car? No, probably not. We probably go into that conversation with a lot of fear. So what we want to do is quiet that person's inner judge, quiet their mind, and let them know, I'm for you. It'll help them from getting so fearful and locked up. Next, during your conversation, accept responsibility for your part in the conflict. Accept responsibility for your part in the conflict. Remember, every conflict involves two people, and you are one of them. Therefore, you are part of the problem. It may be that you weren't clear enough on your expectations. It may be that you did not give enough resources to the person that reports to you. It may be that you did not hold them accountable. You did not delegate well. If you need to talk to your director, it may be that you didn't ask enough questions to get clarity on what your responsibilities really are. So accept responsibility for your part in the conflict. Clarify the issue. You want to state the issue very clearly, very succinctly. When you said I had a big nose in front of the team, that hurt my feelings. Now, it would be very easy in a situation like that to say, oh, you shouldn't be hurt by that. I was just kidding. We were just having fun. But listen to their perspective and believe that if they said that it hurt, it really hurt. And then restate what you heard. So instead of saying, oh, you shouldn't be hurt by that big nose comment, I didn't mean anything, say, oh, so when I said you had a big nose in front of the team, that really hurt you. Just say exactly what they said back to them. It's very validating, and it lets them know that you heard them and you're taking them seriously. Then express where to go from there. So, back to our big nose example. Thank you. I would really appreciate it if you didn't make fun of the way I look in front of the team. That's it. But hopefully you can see how, while that may be, for most of us, a silly example, the same thing can be said of pretty much any example. Oh, so you don't want me to yell at you. You don't want me to talk about this. You don't want me to behave in this way. You don't want me to be late to meetings, let's say. Now, we've already established that conflict stirs up a lot of negative feelings in us, which is very natural. So here's some steps to ensure that we can experience peace while we are addressing conflict. Recognize that there is truth in the criticism. There's always some truth in the criticism. And then this may be difficult for you. It is for me at times. Thank the person for sharing so openly. Because we've already established that it's very difficult to engage in conflict with people. So for someone to initiate with you took a lot of courage for them. So thank them. I was teaching a class in Singapore. There was a young woman in the class from Hong Kong. And after the class, she came up to me and got like right in my face. She was right next to me. And she said, come over here. She said, "You are a proud man." I thought, wow, this is different. And my initial response was not real pleasant, what was going through my head. This is very uncharacteristic in Asia to directly confront someone, and especially for a woman to confront a man. And thank God I was in a pretty good place mentally, and I said, okay, I don't disagree with you, but I would like to know, what did I do to give you the impression that I'm a proud man? And she said, "You talk like a drill sergeant." Huh. Okay, well, thank you for telling me that. Would it help you to know that I was in the Army for 6 years? And when you're in the Army for 6 years, you pick up a few things. So maybe that's what's coming out. And I didn't realize that, so thank you for letting me know that I talk like a drill sergeant. I will work on that so that I don't appear so arrogant and I'm more effective as a communicator. So her perspective was that I was proud. And okay, I am. So I got to own that. But then ask yourself and others, what can I learn from this? What can I learn from this? How can I grow? Remember, conflict is an opportunity to grow. Forgive and accept. When someone comes to you, or when you confront someone, forgive that person for what they did. Don't necessarily forget it, but accept. Forgive and accept that person. Continue to move forward. Don't necessarily forget what happened. Learn from it. There may need to be some time to restore trust in the relationship. That's fine. This is a great quote, though I love this. To forgive is to set the prisoner free, only to discover the prisoner was me. When we hold on to hurts and wrongs, when we become bitter, we build a cage around ourselves and we lock ourselves up. And forgiveness is the key to unlock that prison. The person who wronged you, your bitterness doesn't hurt them at all. They could care less. The only person you're hurting is yourself. And so conflict then can only truly be resolved when real forgiveness has taken place. Ultimately, that's the place where you want to go. Where you say, hey, you know what? I'm sorry that I hurt your feelings when I said you had a big nose. Will you forgive me? If you've wronged someone, ask them specifically to forgive you and state what it was that you did. And if you did something to someone, say, will you please forgive me for saying, you've got a big nose. So, really, those specifics allow people to integrate the forgiveness.
자, 이 Zeus 빅리스트의 문제 어떤 생리스트가 있는데 어려울 아무튼 어려울하고
I'm not going to take a lot of time to go through this. It's in your notes. A couple of points I will make, though. Stick with one issue. Stick with one issue. Focus on the behavior, not the character. So it's not you're lazy and irresponsible because you're always late to meetings. It's we need to talk about you being late to team meetings. Tell me what's happening. What's the problem here? Do not attack their character. So you have this list. This is a couple points that I wanted to bring up. Then when you're listening, if someone does attack your character, what you want to do is focus on the issue and ignore the character things. I don't know if any of you were also in the military like I was, but basic training is a great place to learn how to do that. Because when a sergeant tells you to move a sandbag from there to there, it's usually full of character attacks. You lazy private, bloody, 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 move that, bloody, 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 over there. And they'll call you all sorts of names. And you have to filter all that out and focus on, I need to move that sandbag over to that spot. Now, a lot of times, people will try to change the subject when you're in conflict with them. When you're listening to their perspective, they may start talking about all this other stuff. They may start accusing you. Well, you did this time, and you did this, and you did this. So you can very quickly say, after they've gone on a bit, maybe a minute or two, we can talk about that another time. Right now, the issue we need to talk about is your behavior, is this situation. So it's a way to acknowledge you hear their complaint and you will address it, but then you bring them back to task. The issue right now is this, and we'll talk about that other thing later. I think I've got, is that it? So here are some different resources for you guys. Yeah, it's Peacemaker Ministries. And all of these principles are found, believe it or not, in the Bible. Do you guys have any questions? All right. It's nice to know that I and my translators were so clear. Yes?
When somebody does something again and again, you talk about it, but the person how can you handle with this?
Right, okay. That's a great question. You confront someone on their behavior and it continues to happen. What can you do about that?
자, 내가 쏟기 시트를 만한 막연해서 막연해서 우려야 돼.
What's that?
내가 쏟기
You don't know.
Pray for him.
Pray for him, yeah. Hit him?
No, for me, at least I do that.
야, 이 문제 할
Yes.
때 봐야 돼. Maybe talk to him face to face.
Yeah. Okay, you do, but it continues to happen.
Maybe need to hear well.
Okay,
Need to hear the point. What is the issue?
yeah. What's the issue? Be patient. It keeps happening.
Yeah.
It's like talking to a wall.
He said just ignore this person.
Ignore them. Okay.
Kick him out from your life.
Okay, so, yeah. Excellent. Establish consequences. If this behavior doesn't change, this is what's going to happen. If you cannot make it to team meetings on time, we're going to cut you from the team, or I'm going to find a new assistant coach. So you establish consequences, and then remember the accountability and results part of that pyramid of success. You need to hold them accountable, and you need to follow through on the consequences, the results. If your behavior continues like this, these are the negative consequences. Or, if you can change your behavior, these are the positive consequences. Okay? Yeah, Lena.
I have a question, I think.
Yeah.
Maybe can help include one person more in the situation. Like,
Oh, okay. All right. Okay. So it may be that you need to bring someone else into the situation. Maybe someone with more authority or someone with more skills, like a counselor or pastor, someone who can help you resolve the conflict, or someone in authority, like an athletic director, who will say, yeah, we're going to cut you if you do not change your behavior. Good. But setting boundaries to protect yourself and really to protect the other person as well. Because if their behavior continues, they're going to get in even more trouble and they're going to hurt more people. So I hope that answers your question. That's an excellent question. Good. All right. I think we have time for one more question. Yes.
I guess as a question, in the society and age that we live in today, sometimes conflict can come via electronic email.
Oh, yeah.
Aujourd'hui, la société qu'on vit aujourd'hui, parfois le conflit peut arriver à travers l'Internet. Parfois, pas.
That can cause serious difficulty.
Right.
Ça peut causer beaucoup de
Because
difficultés.
anyone can say anything they feel with the protection.
Parce que tout le monde veut parler, c'est
Right.
ce qu'il fait.
Right. So a lot of times in this day of electronic communication, someone can send you a text, an email, they can tweet at you, and it's very aggressive, and there's a lot of conflict. So one of the things I have resolved to do is that if someone is upset with me in an email, I do not reply by email or by text. I call them to them. Because the written word has so little contextual information in it, which means you can't hear the tone. All the nonverbal communication that is so important to understanding is missing in textual communication, in the written word. So I'm a professor of leadership at Concordia University, and one of my students last week sent me an email that said she did not like the tone that I used when I corrected her paper. And I thought to myself, what tone? All I did was write words. But in her mind, because of her past and her upbringing, she is interpreting those words with the tone. Her inner judge is what's going on. And so what I said to her was, wow, thank you so much for letting me know. I'm really sorry about that. Specifically, what phrases, what did I write that was so upsetting to you, because I don't want to do that again. My hope is that because of the conversations that we've had on the phone and in class, that you would read my comments with that same tone, which I tend to be very lighthearted and not what your typical professor sounds like, more like a friend. And so I think we were able to, to get that sorted out, but that's a great point. Do not engage in conflict via email or text. Call the person. All right. Thank you very, very much. It's a privilege to be here. Thank you. Thank you. Nice.